Hey, Chief.
Hey, Cyrus.
How you doing today?
Not too bad. How about you?
Excellent. So we just want to talk a little bit today about Transformers, the first generation TV shows.
Yes.
One of the things I want to stress before we begin is that we would really appreciate it if you guys like and subscribe to our channel down below. We're a comic book company that loves to talk about other entertainment properties like movies. We love talking about TV shows, and we love talking about video games. So any of those things, if you're interested, be sure to subscribe down below.
Sure.
So Transformers to you is a pretty special property, I think, right?
Yes, to a very much so, to a great deal of degree. Because I first came to America. I immigrated here in 1984 with my family,
right?
And that was the year Transformers came out.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it's kind of interesting because when I first came here, I couldn't speak a single word of English. So you see that stuff come on, you really have no idea what it is exactly. It's a robot show because I came from Taiwan, and you grew up with Japanese robot cartoons, anime all the time on TV. So seeing something like that, I go, okay, I'm kind of familiar with this. But there are a lot of things that's very, very different and unique about it.
Sure. Mm-hmm. One of the things that really just attracts me to Transformers is just how every character is very different.
Yes.
And they're very distinct with how they're portrayed, and you can easily understand them as characters. Mm-hmm. And so because they're able to interact with each other in different ways, they really do feel almost human, even though they are robots.
Well, they're designed more as characters than the traditional anime robots. Yes. I mean, I remember the first time I watched the show, and this is not even knowing English that well. Just kind of like you said, they're all individual and have all personality. Mm-hmm. I remember the thing that struck me very, very quickly was that they're very advanced robots compared to what I was getting out of Japanese anime.
Yeah,
mainly because when you watch Japanese anime, most of the robot show there at the time, the robots are piloted by a human being.
Right. They're not Transformers. They're sentient.
They're sentient. They're moving by themselves. So that was the first thing that struck me. It was like, oh, they can kind of act on their own. Even as a kid, I think I was 9-year-old at the time, immediately I felt like they were far more advanced than Japanese robots, the way they're portrayed. And then second of all, Transformers use guns, which is very interesting because in most Japanese anime, they kill their enemy with a sword.
Right.
But Transformers carry guns. So even that was an impression that I go, wow, they're far more advanced than most Japanese robots.
And they also bleed too, which is interesting. And they need to be repaired, and they feel and they have emotions. Mm-hmm. And so across a lot of different areas, they feel, again, more human.
Yes.
But then at the same time, the factions that they develop, even there, you can see that it's not just good versus bad. Both sides sort of feel like they're justified.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's pretty exciting.
Oh, yes. Not to mention, I remember my first impression was seeing commercials on TV for the toys.
Okay.
You saw that, you actually go, I kind of want that.
Which one jumped out at you first?
The first commercial, of course, they had there was 3 cars on the commercial. There was, I believe it was Jazz, Sideswipe, and Prowl.
Okay.
And for some reason, I always liked police cars as a kid. So Prowl was the one that kind of, caught my attention. And he was the first Transformer I got.
Yes.
Yeah, I got that. And then immediately after that, Optimus Prime was my second one. Because you got home with the toy, you open up the catalog sheet and you see all the other toys in there. So you go, I kind of like the big truck one.
Yeah.
So you got that I think shortly, probably a month or so after that, my parents bought me that. And from there, you kind of slowly grew.
Yeah.
But I think Transformers had a very strong appeal to kids because they were cars.
Yeah.
All the good guys were cars. And generally, I think little boys like cars too. So that was a interesting, I think, marketing tactic they were employing.
Sure.
Overall, if you look at even the way Transformers were designed from the marketing perspective, they were very different from Japanese toys too.
I would agree.
Yeah, they were more like a familiarity with how boys behave. So they categorized them that way. Because originally Transformers was like different groups of just transforming robots, that really had no relation to one another. But they categorized it so a way that it appeals to boys and giving them personalities, and character traits that are more relatable. And Transformers, to me, even as a kid, was not that easy to grasp either. Mainly because, like I said, I came here, I didn't know a single word of English.
Yeah.
Names like Optimus Prime is really, really difficult for someone who doesn't know English. It's not even real. Optimus is not a real English word to begin with. So I remember just, looking at the dictionary and trying to figure out what their name means.
But you couldn't really figure it out at the beginning.
You were trying to maybe that's what it is. Can't find that word in the dictionary.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. So Transformers was very interesting to me as a kid because it wasn't like you look at a lot of Japanese robots where, you can get what they are very quickly. Their names kind of relates very closely to what the toy was. But here, their names were very different. Their names sometimes describe their ability or personality trait.
On top of that, too, I feel like everything within the Transformers universe has its own sort of meaning, and so you can really get a sense of their culture. They talk a lot about, you know, people of the past that you'll never even see. Yes. And so it's interesting that you're getting a little small piece in time for their entire legacy, rather than you're just seeing it from the beginning. Well, I mean, then we can, you say even the cartoon itself was very smart in creating an actual world. Where they come from, why they're here, and motivations are very clear on both sides. There was never any doubt as a kid when we watched. Even though my English wasn't that good, you can kind of follow what's going on. And it was interesting. And I think one of the excitement back then was just saying, okay, I got this toy. Oh, there it is on screen. And almost every character was depicted, the toy was translated into the show without any problem. It's not like nowadays a lot of the modern Transformer shows. Sometimes they only depict a few characters. They don't show the entire toy line. Back then, I think the appeal was the fact that every kid who got a Transformer, pretty much, that first year saw them show up in the cartoon series. Sure. So how do you feel about the basic icons between the Autobots and the Decepticons? What do you mean by the icons? One of the things that I feel is really special about it is that even the icons, the little sigil, the symbols, the little symbol that the Autobots and the Decepticons have are famous enough to even be packaged on their own. And so you'll see people wear shirts with it. They'll buy posters with it. They'll even put it on their cars, which I think is pretty awesome. But back then, you couldn't get stuff like that. Yeah. It's later on, it kind of bled slowly through the culture. You can get T-shirts and all that. Back then, you basically just had the toy. Yes. I remember the symbol was kind of cool in a weird way because I think it's an easy way for kids to identify this is a good guy, this is a bad guy, very clearly. Yes. The red Autobot face and the purple Decepticon. Markings are all, I think just very easily for kids to relate to what they are. To a bunch of toys that really kind of don't correlate with one another. Right. And I think it was very smart. The marketing was smart. When you watch the show, it was very smart. The show itself, I think part of the reason why it's so successful, because overall development was done through Marvel Comics. Yes. And they kind of employed all the superhero logic and formula to developing these characters. Every character had, like you said, own personality, had their own special ability or powers, kind of like superheroes. And also like Marvel Comics in those days, very simple, easy to gravitate to characters. Very clearly, the good guy looked like a good guy, bad guy looked like a bad guy. Yes. Yeah. Another thing I think that really helped was the fact that the cartoon versions sometimes differ drastically from the toy. Because a lot of the toys, they have very robotic looking faces. Sometimes they don't even have a mouth, but a lot of the ones in the cartoon, they drew them with more of a human face. And I think that was easier for kids to relate to as well. Sure. Yes. It makes a lot of sense. Also, I thought the voice acting was pretty unique. Oh, because every character, you could sort of tell, even if you weren't looking at it, who was speaking. Oh, yeah. That was always, even now they always credit the Generation 1 as have some really fantastic voice acting. Yes. And I think that was one of the things that made a big difference with the show. Because if they all had sort of the same voice, then it wouldn't have really played into the fact that they're individual characters. Oh, yes. So even if they're written well, if they didn't sound distinct, then it wouldn't have been good. Well, I just remember, like I said, didn't know English that well. So when you watch it, at least there's a weird familiarity every week when when you hear the voices. There's sort of emotional attachment to it as a kid as well. Absolutely. That I remember the first time I heard Optimus Prime's voice, I was a little surprised because Optimus Prime's voice wasn't even similar to anything you've seen on TV at the time. Yes, it was a deep voice, but it wasn't your typical deep cartoon voices. Yeah. And then there was a sort of a gentleness to it as well. So I remember as a kid, you watch it, you're like, oh, this is. But that sort of matches his character also. Yes, but it wasn't what you expected out of even a robot cartoon at the time. So there were some pretty brilliant voice casting and voice choices made for that. Yes. Sometimes there are even characters don't really get much of their own time
in the show because there's so many characters. But just because they had a few good scenes, where they show up, they talked, and just their personality just cut through very, very well in those.
Absolutely. So, overall, I think it's a really interesting show. They definitely did a lot to differentiate themselves from everything that came before it.
Sure.
And, I just... I grew up with it myself, too. Different generation.
Sure.
But it just shows how strong the property is, that it was able to cut through so many different ages and be able to continue to last even today.
Well, a lot of people don't even realize when Transformers came out, it was battling against all sorts of other robot properties that was coming at the time.
Right.
There were the sort of the slightly cheaper toy line GoBots that really was going head-to-head competition with it at the time. Of course, it lost eventually. And then there was also what they called the Godaiken, which is a Japanese import, mostly Bandai robot toys, and they were much more pricier on the price scale. Where Transformers, as a kid, probably between $8 to $20 is your average.
Yeah.
A lot of the Godaiken robots starts about from $25 and up.
Okay.
Yeah. So they were much more pricier for kids to get, and they were not as easily available. On top of that, there was also all sorts of Japanese knockoffs that was just coming in at the time. A lot of Transformers had knockoff too, and you can go to like a local. Even like what we had the stationery stores back then where I grew up in New York, they had real Transformers on the shelf, and right next to it were fake ones you could buy for maybe just a few bucks cheaper. And the quality wasn't that bad either, So, because probably a lot of them were leaked out by manufacturing companies too as well. So to be able to last for this long, at the end, really, I really think it wasn't so much the toys, it was the marketing and the show that pulled it all together.
I agree.
And the show really was quite outstanding too, when you watched it back then. Every episode there was enough action and character development and just excitement as a kid to watch.
Yes.
And the other thing that made it, I think, a little different from other cartoons at the time when you watch on TV, something like Inspector Gadget, where every episode was kind of standalone, Transformers did have a bit of a continuity that connected it, a little bit in the first season, where certain characters would have an episode where they show up for the first time, introduced, and then later on come back, and you go, okay, there's a connection. So it's not like you watch an episode and then the stuff never get brought up again.
Right.
There was a slight continuity that was happening overall, and that was kind of nice about it because you really felt like you're seeing a world progressing.
It really helped you be able to buy into the show.
Yes.
And really believe that, I watched this episode in the past, and it has consequences.
Yes.
That's something that I feel a lot of other shows didn't necessarily engage in.
No.
Like, I like G.I. Joe a lot, but sort of its episodic feel sometimes makes it feel like there aren't necessarily consequences.
Yes, even G.I. Joe don't do it as well. I watched that too at the time because there was kind of the two big cartoon show for boys.
Sure.
But you're right, G.I. Joe, even though it's done by the same people, it had a bit less continuity when compared to Transformers.
Yes.
So I think that was another reason why it stood out among a lot of the other cartoons at the time. But I think the other smart thing was it wasn't so tight in continuity like modern cartoons where every episode has to follow another.
Yeah.
Kid can just sit in and watch anytime, and then you kind of get what's going on, because there were things that were referenced. Maybe, okay, this character showed up that I didn't know before. And you can kind of go along with it without too much trouble. I think one of the problems we have a lot of modern cartoons is that the continuity is so tight, it's harder for younger kids to sit in and maybe in episode 3 or 4 and then really connect with what happened before.
Well, that's exactly why the method in which you're watching it matters too. Like if you can just sit down and watch it on Netflix or on YouTube,
sure,
that makes a big difference because you can start from episode 1.
Yes.
But back then,
no, you could. And Transformers first came on as well a Saturday morning weekend cartoon.
Right.
In New York, it was broadcasted Sunday morning. I think it came about 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And I didn't even know it came on until some other kids in school kind of told me, "Oh yeah, I was watching this," and I was like, "Oh, okay," So I went home and check it out for the first time. And I think when I watched it, it was already 6 or 7 episodes broadcasted.
Right.
But you watch it, you were immediately fascinated by it. Just a lot of stuff goes on. The show has a lot of danger that occurs. Every episode somebody gets hurt.
Right.
One of the Autobots gets shot or blown up, and kind of goes back and forth on both sides.
It feels like a real war.
I wouldn't even say real war. It just feels like there was something that kids would compel kids to keep watching.
Right.
Because I think as a kid, we don't really grasp the idea of war that much. But just kind of like, oh, there's, the robots are fighting. And that's what you kind of care about.
There's conflict.
Yeah, and you want to see the hero win at the end. And pretty much at the end of every episode, the hero do win out.
Yes.
And unlike Japanese robot shows where at the end, it's always the giant robot kills the monster or the bad guy with a sword. And that'll be the end of it. Sometimes Transformers' resolution would be much more different. Sometimes the character learns a lesson. Sometimes they have to use their wits to kind of figure out a solution to a problem.
Right.
For instance, there was the very first Insecticon episode where, one of the Insecticon characters was able to blast lightning. And at the very end, they resolved by saying, oh, we have rubber tires, so we transform to cars, and the lightning will affect us that way. And that's something scientifically, you don't really see that in Japanese, robot anime all that much.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's why the show, even when you're watching it as a kid, felt like there was a cut above the rest at the time.
Yeah.
Because back then, when you get up on Saturday morning, you watch shows, there was stuff just like, the reruns of Bugs Bunny and Woody Woodpecker. And now, of course, Inspector Gadget, I think, was the American, show that was pretty popular at the time. But you compare that to Transformers and G.I. Joe, they were just
a cut above the rest.
Far, far, far above. Where there's, like you said, there's actual action and consequences in every episode. And it feels like you're all watching the world. There's multiple characters you're trying to understand and get familiar to. And there are even characters that you may not care about as a toy. But once you see it on the show, you go, I kind of want that.
I understand exactly who they are. Right. And that makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Overall, to be able to create something like that, again, is impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And, it wasn't by accident. They did a lot of things that were really smart for the time.
Sure.
And laid the seeds early and allowed for us to be able to get to know each and every character.
Yes.
Made toys that went along with it, which again is smart. But then also they really did a good job of building the brand. And,
yes.
It lasted for years afterward. Because I came out in 96 and I was watching it in the early 2000s.
Oh, boy, yeah.
Even still, I was just like, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. This is exactly what I want.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a lot of toys. So I had Starscream, I had Optimus, and I just thought those were the coolest. And then I also had a Bumblebee, and I had a few others. And you're just like, this is great.
Sure. Well, I think the longevity really is speaks for itself. But really thanks to the very first Generation 1 Transformers.
Yes.
Because if it wasn't established that well, we probably wouldn't have what it is today. It would probably just keep morphing and have different characters throughout.
Sure.
But also there was a period when Transformers weren't even available for a while. I think around 88 to maybe 94, 95, it was kind of like a dead period for Transformers.
What happened?
Well, just back then when a toy line runs its course, that's it. The toy comes usually done with it. They don't consider bringing it back. Mm-hmm. But of course, in the 90s, I think most companies started realizing there's franchises and branding that they can reuse again. So they were doing that. Because like, hey, we did marketing and spent millions on this stuff before, even though it's no longer fresh to some of the younger generations. We can kind of easily bring it back because there's a name recognition, and they started doing that more and more. That's why I think it really helped bring it back. After there was kind of the dead period for Transformers.
Sure.
And ever since it came back, it just never stopped. They realized this is a established toy line. Let's just keep it going.
Makes all the difference.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
All right.
So that's kind of my experience growing up with it. And I'm sure a lot of you guys who watch Transformers, and even back then, or even throughout all these other generations of cartoon development, probably feels differently, or still get just as excited as I am when I talk about this stuff.
So what you guys could do down in the comment section below is just sort of tell us what was your favorite character from Transformers, and just let us know which toys, if you bought any, did you actually love owning the most. So I think that's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's going to be great.
So thank you guys for watching. We'll hope you see you in the next video too.
Yeah, see you guys next time.
All right, bye-bye.